We just left off the last study with Paul defending his apostleship by stating that there was no later contact to oppose his apostleship. Today, we will be talking about the fourth point where Paul was defending his apostleship. And that is, he had an affirming contact with none other than Peter, the apostle. And that is from Galatians 2, verses 11 right through until the end, verse 21. And it goes as follows. But when Peter was come to Antioch, see, he had gone back to Antioch. Peter then rejoined them in Antioch, which was Paul's home church. When Peter came to Antioch, I withstood him face to face, because he was to be blamed. He was to be blamed for what? He was to be blamed for all these Judaizers coming up and perverting the gospel. Well, let's follow. For before that, certain came from James. Before, some people came from James and Jerusalem. He ate with the Gentiles. But when they had come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. Remember, at this point, Barnabas was still with Paul. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if thou, being a Jew, live after the manner of Gentiles, and not like a Jew, why do you make the Gentiles live as the Jew? Folks, let's read what I had to say. Later on, Peter visited Antioch, the church where believers were first called Christians. Imagine that. Apparently, he came to visit and investigate why and how their witnessing was so powerful. He had no problem fellowship and eating with the Gentile believers. But when some official visitors came from James in Jerusalem, what did he say? He drew back and separated himself, being afraid of those of the circumcision, being afraid of those Orthodox Jewish believers. Whoa! Peter avoided the Gentiles at that point when they were there and hung out with the Jews only. Folks, he was showing the believers in Antioch, you see, there's still something special about being Jewish. The other Jews likewise acted so hypocritically, so much so that even Barnabas joined them. That's in verse 13. Folks, Paul was frustrated, and that is an understatement. He said, but when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if thou, being a Jew, livest after the manner of Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? You know, I do not think Paul was liked very much by the other Jewish believers after that confrontation. But Paul had alleged Peter. He challenged Peter. But not even one person challenged Paul. That was Paul's point. The lack of opposition to Paul's authority should be considered as an affirmation of Paul's apostleship. What was the purpose to say all this? Well, first, Titus did not need to be circumcised when he accompanied Paul in Jerusalem, where the Acts 15 council's authority overrode the false teachers who sought to overwrite Paul's. Paul was saying that the Gentiles shouldn't have to do all those 600 laws. And never mind the 600 laws, they shouldn't have to be circumcised either. Second, both Paul and Barnabas were commended and recognized as set apart for being apostles to Gentiles by none other than Peter himself and James and John. The third thing is Paul was not challenged when he confronted Peter, implying that his authority was equal to that of Peter. Can you imagine that? Last, he stressed salvation by faith alone, as verse 16 of today's passage says. Every authentic Christian is, get this, justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of the law, for by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. Probably it would be best to quote verses 15 to 20 directly from the Bible as Paul was speaking to Peter. We, who are Jews by nature and not sinner of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. You see, both Jew and Gentile, they were justified by the faith of Jesus Christ. Not just the faith in Jesus Christ, but the faith of Jesus Christ, which he has given to us as a gift. Hallelujah! Even we have believed in Jesus Christ that we might be justified by the faith of Christ and not by the works of the law. For by the works of the law shall no flesh be justified. I just quoted that, didn't I? But if, while we seek to be justified by Christ, we ourselves also are found sinners, is therefore Christ a minister of sin? God forbid! Now, in the original Greek, it didn't say God forbid, because that was what the King James people put in. It means this is a total impossibility beyond any stretch of the imagination. The modern versions say, may it never be. Well, that isn't strong enough. God forbid is what the King James people put in to say, look, this is ridiculous even to think about this. What did Paul then say? If I build again the things which were destroyed. In other words, everything that the Old Testament stood for, Jesus Christ came in and brought in a new testament, a new covenant. For if I rebuild the things which I destroyed, I make myself a transgressor. For I, through the law, am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. This is a famous passage. I am crucified with Jesus. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ, who lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live, hallelujah, by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Folks, he loved me. And not just me, but every one of the 7 billion people on the face of the earth can say the same thing. I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me personally and gave himself for me. If they only believed. Verse 21, which is the last verse of chapter 2, says this. Verse 21 gave the main reason why he, Paul, a Jew by birth, did not join the other Jews in impressing those visitors from Jerusalem. He says, I do not set aside the grace of God. Hallelujah. God's riches at Christ's expense. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness is through the law, then Christ died without a cause. You see, righteousness was never through the law. This is why they had to sacrifice year after year after year to cover up the sins. But Jesus Christ died to take away the sins, so that when Jesus, hallelujah, when God looks at us, he looks at us through Jesus-colored glasses and sees only righteousness. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness is through law, then Christ died without cause. You know, the King James Bible said that Jesus would have died in vain. Fully 1/3 of the book of Galatians was spent by Paul to defend his apostleship. And because he was accused of being a rogue disciple sent by Jerusalem, you know, they assumed he was sent by Jerusalem and he became rogue, proclaiming proudly a false apostleship. Paul had to show he was not acting independently, making up a false gospel as he journeyed along. He defended his apostleship in 4 arguments. 4. This is to recap what we were talking about the last few weeks. First, he had a special contact by Jesus Christ. Second, he had no early contact with Jerusalem. Third, he had no later contact to oppose his apostleship. And finally, he had an affirming contact when he encountered Peter. His apostleship was not challenged. As a matter of fact, he was affirmed as being equal in apostleship to Peter. Folks, if this does not convince us that the teachings of Paul should be heeded, should be listened to, I seriously don't know what would. To repeat, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by my day-to-day faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Folks, this should be a resonant tone for you and for me. That should be your heart cry also. Yes.